Scott Peterson gets the second part of his analysis in this episode from Never a Truer Word, where we look at the words that people choose to use to see if they're telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and look to give you the confidence that comes from truly understanding what words people are using all around you. Now, this is part 2 of the Scott Peterson analysis. Part 1 is linked in the show description. You should check that out before you check this out. And by the way, if you do have a look at part 1, if you're on YouTube, have a look at the comments. There's some really super sharp comments there, including someone that noticed he gets angry when the interviewer doesn't ask a question but gives a command like explain that. And someone else pointed out that the phone rings during part 1. Now, this is a guy who's saying, my wife is missing and I'm dreadfully concerned about her. But when his phone rings, he doesn't automatically run to answer it. Have a look at part 1 and then we'll go to part 2 where he answers this question.
Are you in any way connected to Laci's disappearance?
Well, see what he has to say. Now, listen, telling a lie is really hard. Telling a really important, stressful lie is even harder. And the truth will leak out if we let someone talk enough. In the book Truthful Deception, there's around 50 ways that you can see the truth coming out in someone's word. And that it's the tactics that's in that book that we're going to use as we watch Scott Peterson in this episode. Keep an eye out for clarity. Can you understand what he's saying? Does it flow? Does it sound authentic? Because what you'll find is when someone is making things up, they don't have the authentic language to deal with it, to relate to us what has happened or what they've experienced. And therefore, they stumble their way through it a little bit. And it's really hard if someone's deceiving you to picture mentally what it is they're saying. Watch for leakage. Right now in this interview, he's claiming his wife is missing. He's now serving life for her murder. So does anything leak out that shows he knows she's not coming back? He knows what's happened. He's not as innocent as he's trying to paint himself here. And watch for irrelevance. Watch for when he goes away from the question or what he's asked or what he's talking about and gives us something irrelevant or offers up a fact that seems to show he's innocent, and yet when you look at it, it's just hot air. We left part 1 at the end of a question. The question was, she just claims you called her, this is Amber Fry, you called Amber Fry on the 24th and told her that you were going to Maine, you're visiting your family in Maine, and then you were going to Brussels. And Scott started his answer with, Gloria, I'm not going to waste what little media time we have and in this forum with, this is a short newscast. I don't know how much of these words you're going to use or not. I'm not going to waste that by defending myself or talking about irrelevant things. And then he continues.
It's better served if we talk about what happened and where's Laci.
Okay.
So the facts are that we know that on Christmas Eve, I left the house here around 9:30. She was here in the home. Okay, that's a fact that has to get out there because it's been reported erroneously that I saw her leave the house. Okay, she was in the house. That's one thing we know. Second thing we know is that the dog was returned to our yard with its leash on at 10:30 by a neighbor. Those are 2 things we know about her disappearance. And hopefully those can help some people. There are things that we need to get out there are the tip lines, which is the Modesto Police tip line, 209-342-6166, and also 1-866-LACI info, L-A-C-I info. And that's a tip line for people who have talked to the police. Even if they talk to them, please call that tip line if you saw her that day, if you've seen her since, or if there's something you think is important in the neighborhood. We want to be very specific.
Okay.
The other big push that we need is LaciPeterson.com. People can go there and print off the flyers and distribute those into every medical center, bus stop, high traffic area in the nation, because it could be the next flyer that brings her home to our family.
Okay, so he moves on and says, it's better served if we talked about what happened and where's Laci. So he starts off with this control theme again. It's better served. So, Gloria, these questions you're asking, I'm not going to deal with them. I'm going to tell you what it is I should be talking about and we should be talking about. So it's better served. He then tries to talk about some facts. And they are the facts that we know. So what he's doing here is saying, this is not just my story. This is facts. This is factual things. And we know. So it's more than just me claiming this. It's that everyone knows this. It's we know. And then he talks about himself. I left the house at 9:30. So really, this is not leading with Laci. You know, this is not the facts about Laci. This is facts about him. The first fact that he mentions is when he left the house. Now, why does he lead with himself? Laci's the one that's missing, and yet he starts with a fact around himself. So why is that? Is he more important in his head than anything else? Well, it could be. Or could it be that he wants to establish his movements more than he wants to establish Laci's movements? But whatever it is, he leads with himself. I left the house here at 9:30. And then secondly, Laci was at home. It's not stated as Laci was at home at 9:30 when I left, and that's the last time anyone saw her. No, he's talking about his movements. And let's look at these facts that we know. Well, twice he has to say she was home at 9:30. He says the facts we know: on Christmas Eve, I left the house here at around 9:30. She was here in the home. Okay, that's a fact that has to get out there because it's reported I saw her leave the house. She was in the house. It's one thing we know. So we've got that repetition of we know again. Really, we only have his word for this, don't we? So he's trying to change his word, which was she was in the house when I left, to everyone knows that she was in the house when I left. And why is he really keen? He repeats it twice, that she was at home in the house. Well, one thing is, when someone's lying, they feel like if they say it once, it won't be believed, or it might not have been heard. So they will say the deceptive part more than once to make sure that you really got it, to make sure that it really sinks in. He says it was reported erroneously. Yeah, big word, big formal word, as if to say, I'm using big words, so it really must have been erroneous. Interesting. And also, those are two things we know about her disappearance, is how he finishes that section off. Those are two things we know about her disappearance, but we know a lot more. He's talked a lot more about things that happened that day, about things that he did that day. We know that he had an affair and he told her before that she went disappearing and so on. No. All he is saying is she was there at 9:30 and the dog was returned at 10:30. By the way, I want you to remember that he gave those times out, but we know a lot more. And why does he say the dog was returned to our yard with its leash on? That seems like really irrelevant information. He could have just said the exact same thing with the dog was returned to our yard at 10:30 by a neighbour, but he has to say with a leash on. That's important because the story that he wants us to believe is that Laci must have left the house to walk a dog, been abducted or went missing at that point, and the dog was left behind. And the reason we know this happened is that the dog had its leash on. If the dog had come back without a leash, the dog could have escaped or anything like that. But with its leash on, says, yeah, Laci left the house to go walking the dog. So that's, I think, why he thinks it's important to get across with its leash on. But why does he think that's important? Why doesn't he just say she must have gone to walk the dog because blah, blah, blah? Is it that he put the leash on the dog, took the dog somewhere and let it go so that it would look like Laci took the dog for a walk? And he's very proud of this fact, or he wants people to work that out. By the way, this is a guy who I think has real problems with attachments to things, real problems emotionally. You'll notice he doesn't mention the dog's name. There's no closeness there to that dog. It's just the dog. He then went on to say, hopefully those can help some people. He gives 2 tip lines and he gives the web address or asks people to print off flyers and so on. Do you remember the question? Yeah, because the question was, that Amber Fry said you phoned her and said you were going to Maine and then Brussels, right? And he hasn't dealt with that whatsoever. He hasn't denied he said those things to Amber Fry. He's taken the question and he's moved a huge distance from what that question is to asking people to distribute flyers. It's a huge move from the question. The question was, did you lie to Amber Fry in this phone call on the 24th? And his answer finishes with, get flyers out there because it could be the next flyer that brings her home to our family. Huge move. In all of that, when he's asking for these tips, he says, it's important, if you've seen something, let us know, but it's important in the neighborhood. We want to be very specific. He wants to be very specific that he only wants people very close, notice something in the neighborhood to come forward to the tip lines. Why is that? Why is that? And why is that at odds with him saying that he wants the flyers to be anywhere in the nation? Really interesting juxtaposition there, isn't it? He wants only sightings or information of anyone that saw Laci in the neighborhood, but he wants the The post is up everywhere in the nation. Here's some more from Scott.
And I know more than I know that you want to find Laci, and the second thing you want to do is clear yourself from suspicion, correct? I mean, that is, you want the focus back on Laci and not on you.
I want people looking for Laci because they're not doing that right now. And that's why I'm sitting down with you in hopes that people will go, you know what? If I think he had some involvement, if I don't think he had some involvement, that doesn't matter because Laci is what matters. And she's out there missing and she needs to be home with her families. So I don't care to defend myself. I don't care what people think of me. You know, as I've said, question my moral character if you want to. But look at your heart. Think of Laci, her picture, baby, and make the effort to bring her home. And that's a simple reality. That's a simple thing we need to do. Just, you know, think whatever you want of me. As long as you're out there and you're comfortable with yourself, that you're doing what you need to be doing to find Laci and bring her home.
He's asked, I know you want to find Laci and you want to clear yourself from suspicion. Is that correct? You want the focus back on Laci? And he goes on this big talk about if people are suspicious about him and they're not looking for Laci, then they're not doing everything they can to find this missing person. And the kind of insinuation there is, what if you're wrong? What if I'm innocent and you haven't searched for Laci? You will really, really regret that. He's putting people on a guilt trip. You'll notice he doesn't say, I'm really sorry that my behaviour has taken the focus off Laci and onto my behaviour. I'm really sorry my behaviour means that people are looking less for Laci now because they think I had something to do it. He doesn't take any responsibility himself for any of that. He puts all the responsibility on the people who may be going, I'm not really going to look for Laci because I think I know what happened to her and this guy had some sort of involvement. It's a huge guilt trip. Interesting plural of families when he says she's out there missing and needs to be home with her families. Yeah. So really, I think he really wanted to show all the way through this interview that he's acting as part of this family unit that's out there that involves Laci's family as well. But he talks about families, plural. So there's more than one family, more than one tribe of people. Why is that? Well, I'll tell you what, you think about a loved one you have. Do you think they have multiple families or do you think they have a family? I tend to think most of my loved ones have a family, whatever that means. However they are related, they have their family around them, not their families around them. And once again, she's out there missing and she needs to be home. Now, does Laci have a voice in this whatsoever? It needs to be home with her families. Well, you just said that you told her that you were having an affair. Does she need to be home with you? No, she doesn't. But Laci has no agency here whatsoever. He's deciding, once again, Mr. Controlling, what Laci needs. He says, I don't care to defend myself. I don't care what people think of me. As I've said, question my moral character if you want to, but look at your heart. And he talks about people's hearts a lot. Think of Laci, her picture, the baby. Now, the baby, that's interesting. We're more than halfway through this interview, and the first time that he's mentioned that Laci was 7.5 months pregnant at the time that she went missing, right? But he says, look at the picture, think of the baby, and make an effort to bring her home. Not the baby home, just Laci. It's as if he's got a prepared script, which is, I want Laci home. But he's forgotten the baby in all of this. He's completely forgotten the baby. So when he does mention it, which is almost like an afterthought later on, he doesn't say that he wants the baby home either. Interesting. Once more, he talks about Laci being away and needing to be found, suggesting the only way that Laci is we're going to know what happened to Laci is if Laci is found. It's not that Laci is going to come back of her own accord. It's not maybe he says he thinks she's been abducted, so it's not the abductor is going to release Laci or Laci is going to escape or get free, or it's that Laci is going to be found. Ultimately, this is just manipulation. Yeah, it's just you're a bad person if you're not looking for Laci, but he doesn't mention that he's a bad person at all. You know, he hasn't even said you can question. He does say you question my moral character. He doesn't say it's rubbish. He doesn't say he's I'm going to defend myself. He doesn't say I'm sorry for that. He says I don't care what people think of me. I think that is to some extent true, but I think he really does care what people think about him.
I know that law enforcement officials have told me that you won't take a lie detector test, that you've wavered back and forth on that. Why?
Well, let me say this about the investigation. I gave you 2 times earlier, 9:30 and 10:30 when the dog was returned here. Investigators on both sides, law enforcement and private, have asked me not to comment any more about times, about conversations I had with the police, about the possible polygraph, tests if I've taken or I've not, and other things surrounding the investigation so that it can be clear. So I'm simply not going to comment
On why
about
you're not
those
going to
things.
take it?
I'm not going to comment if I have or have not taken a polygraph with the police.
The question is, I know that law enforcement officials have told me that you won't take a lie detector test, that you've wavered back and forth on that. Why? And does he answer the question? Does he say why he's wavered back and forth on taking a lie detector test? Of course he doesn't. He moves it straight away. And he says, well, let me say that about the investigation, or let me say this about the investigation. So he's moved from, why are you not taking a lie detector test, to talking about a word salad around the investigation. He mentions that investigators on both sides, law enforcement and private, have asked me not to comment. Both sides is interesting. That suggests there are 2 sides. Now, if he has private investigators working on this, they should all be on the same side trying to find Laci. But he talks about investigators on both sides. Yeah. So why is this war going on between law enforcement and the private investigators? Why are they on different sides? Well, potentially law enforcement are independent and are just following the evidence and trying their very best to get Laci, whereas the private investigators are working for Scott and doing the work that he orders them to do. He talks about the possible polygraph. So there's an indication that it didn't happen. The leakage comes out. It's not that it's a polygraph. It's a possible polygraph, i.e., it hasn't happened. The statement that's put to him that he has not had one, that he's wavered on it, really is confirmed by this phrase, possible polygraph. He says, I gave you 2 times earlier, 9:30 and 10:30. And they've asked me not to comment more about the times, but you did earlier in that answer. You spoke very clearly about these times, 9:30 and 10:30. And I think it's very important for him to get those times out, because if he's creating a story of what happened, those are the 2 important things. He left at 9:30 and she was there at 10:30. The dog returned. So it was sometime in that hour, in his version of events, that Laci went missing. That was the last time she was seen, and then there's indications that she disappeared in that time. So he's mentioned the times twice now, and then says, I've been asked not to mention the times. He talks about investigators on both sides, okay? Law enforcement and the private investigators. And he says, they've asked me not to comment any more about times and conversations they have with police. Okay? So therefore, if we just look at who they is, well, the 2 people or 2 entities he's mentioned there are law enforcement and private investigators. Why would law enforcement be having conversations with themselves? Law enforcement have asked me not to comment any more about conversations they have had with the police, is what is being said there. Why? Why would law enforcement have conversations with themselves? What I think has happened here is that word private. Investigators, both sides, law enforcement and private. I think this is not necessarily private investigators. This is maybe attorneys, or maybe it is private investigators, but they're really helping him. They're not helping find Laci. They're helping Scott with his image or whatever it is. And one entity, law enforcement, have not said, don't have any more comments about this. It is the private people that have said, keep your mouth shut. Do not talk anymore, Scott. But he does.
The life insurance policy. Why take one out on Laci? $250,000?
We have life insurance policies in place that were established when we bought this home that you're in right now 2 years ago. There was no life insurance policy taken out recently, as has been reported in the National Enquirer, the dubious source of alien information as well.
The question is, the life insurance policy, why take one out on Laci, 250,000? And he says, we have life insurance policies in place that were established when we bought this home that you're in right now 2 years ago. There was no life insurance policy taken out recently, as has been reported in the National Enquirer, the dubious source of, alien information as well. Okay, so he talks about the life insurance policies established when they bought the home. So understandable in the grand scheme of things. When you buy a home, you may very well take out life insurance policies on the people that are expected to pay the mortgage on that home. But he says they were established then. Now, that to me gives room for the fact that these policies may have been changed. So he didn't take out a brand new life insurance policy on Laci recently, just before she went missing, but maybe he changed the level of cover on one of these life insurance policies. It was established 2 years ago, but maybe that was changed more recently. He does say there was no life insurance policy taken out recently, so that would go with the established thing. These were established then, and he didn't start a new one. Yeah, there was no life insurance policy taken out recently. It was already taken out when they bought the home 2 years ago, but has it been changed? Especially because he says been taken out recently. So he ponders what he's going to say before he says recently. He goes, recently. And what does recently mean? What does recently mean? I recently had a cup of coffee just before I started making this episode, yeah? But, I recently bought a new car. Actually, it was 2 years ago, but in the scheme of things, that is recent. So what does he mean by recently? We don't know. The level of the policy that's put to him is 250,000, and you'll note there is no denial of that level of life insurance being on Laci at all. So he kind of denies that a policy was taken out, but there was one in place. It was established, but he's not arguing with the level of that policy at all.
I know that a neighbor saw you removing things on the 24th. You mentioned this morning that it was umbrellas.
Yeah, we have some large umbrellas for the backyard pool area. Market umbrellas, I think is the term for them.
Why would you store those in the winter?
It started to rain, so I was going to store them. Just like you asked, why would I store them? I was taking them from the pool to store.
Okay. Officials of mine have told me, sources have mentioned to me, that there were cement bags that were in the storage area, and apparently a few of them were empty.
Sure.
Explain that.
Well, I could take you out in the backyard and show you all the cement work and brickwork that we've done to this home, and you'd find, cement bags around here.
So this was something that it was home remodeling, or what were you doing with the cement?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, we're starting to go into areas that investigators have asked me not to comment about, so we should probably, simply put the brakes on at that point.
Okay.
I don't mind commenting about the life insurance policy, but I don't want to give specific times or other information that could jeopardize what they find is valuable information in finding Laci.
This is a really revealing section. We start off with the question, I know that a neighbour saw you removing things on the 24th. You mentioned this morning that it was umbrellas. And he said, yeah, we have some large umbrellas for the backyard pool area. Market umbrellas, I think, is the term for them. Now, this all starts to get a little bit extra. Why does he feel the need? Why does he think it'd be useful to tell us what the collective term for these umbrellas is, or the actual term for these large umbrellas? He doesn't talk about moving them at all, which is put to him in the question. He just states a fact. We have some large umbrellas for the backyard pool area, then gives extra. He gives the name market umbrellas is, I think, a term for them. So there's some resistance here to the question, because he's asked a neighbor, or it's put to him, a neighbor saw you removing things, and he says, yeah, we have some large umbrellas, but he doesn't talk about moving them at all, but he will tell us what those umbrellas are called. The interviewer catches this and says, why would you store these in winter? He said, it started to rain, so I was gonna store them. He doesn't actually say storing them, does he? He doesn't say, so I stored them. He says, I was going to store them. Interesting. So did he store them or not? Because he's only said he was gonna store them, not that he stored them. I will give him some credit. He says, we have, so it's him and Laci. And he says have in the present tense. there. So again, consistently, he's talked about Laci in the present tense. I see a lot of other things to worry about, but he consistently does talk about her in the present tense. The interviewer continues about some of these things that she has been told about. Sources have mentioned to me there were cement bags that were in the storage area, and apparently a few of them were empty. And he just says, sure. She says, explain that. And he says, well, I could take you out in the backyard and show you all the cement work and brickwork that we've done to this home, and you'd find, you know, cement bags around there. Now, this is not explicit. He's asked to explain why the empty cement bags were in the storage area. He doesn't say, we've done a lot of work in this house, and a lot of that has involved cement. That's why there are empty cement bags there. He just says, I'll take you out and show you the backyard and the brickwork, and you'll find cement bags around there. So he doesn't, you'll find them. He doesn't explicitly say those empty cement bags come from the work. He just says there's been work done and there are empty cement bags, but he doesn't join those two things up. He's not explicit at all. And we've got something that he's done here. He's offering proof. He's offering to show proof here. That's very interesting, and he'll do it again later. It's not enough for him just to say, this is what happened. He really doesn't say, there's a lot of brickwork. We've done a lot of work in this house. A lot of that's involved cement. That's why there are empty cement bags. He's like, I'll show you the brickwork that's been done. You'll notice it's irrelevant. Just because a lot of brickwork has been done, then that does not mean that he did not have something to do with Laci's disappearance. And this is that irrelevance here. I can show you something physical, therefore it didn't happen. I notice he talks about the home a lot. He talked about it with the life insurance. He talks about Laci being home a lot. Home, obviously, a central thought of his, a priority in his head. I don't know what it means, but he really does reference the home a lot. Quite often tells the interviewer that she is in his home. You'll notice that she said, explain that. That's one of those orders statements rather than a question. And I think those would get his back up, because when she moves on, she says, so this is what, home remodeling? What were you doing with the cement? She's on to the fact that he hasn't explicitly answered that question. And he says, yeah, and again, we're starting to go into areas that investigators have asked me not to comment about. So we should probably, simply put the brakes on at that point. You'll notice now that it's gone from being both sides, law enforcement and his investigators, just down to investigators. So again, I think this is the investigators or maybe attorneys or whatever it is that are on his side that are saying, Scott, shut your mouth, stop talking about stuff like this. We have the ordering and control again by saying we're putting the brakes on at that point. And then he tries to move this subject of what we're talking about from these umbrellas and these cement bags back onto other things, which is why he tries to talk about something else. I don't mind talking about the life insurance policy, but I don't want to give specific times or other information that could jeopardize what they find is valuable information in finding Laci. But he's given those specific times, 9:30 and 10:30, twice now. I don't want to give specific times, but you have given specific times. What are your thoughts so far? Do you think that he's just misunderstood and genuinely has concern for Laci? Do let me know in the comments. It's always great to hear from you. Have you spotted anything I didn't? Let me know in the comments as well. Or get in touch on social media. All the links for social media are in the show description. The like button or a plus button makes this get to more people, so I'm really appreciative if you do that. Share it as well. That would be great to share with people who are interested in missing people or understanding more about true crime or are interested in this case specifically, especially as the LA Innocence Project are now involved and want to show that he's a wronged husband and has been jailed improperly through improper investigation. And the subscribe or follow buttons mean you get episodes like this every time they get released. And if you want to become a member on YouTube or subscriber on Spotify, you will get early access, exclusive content, and a whole lot more as well. Let's go on with more from Scott Peterson.
I know that you mentioned on Good Morning America that it wouldn't surprise you if they found blood
Sure.
in your vehicles. Explain why.
Well, take a look at my hand. You can see, cuts here on my knuckles, numerous scars. I work on farms. I work with machinery. I know I cut my knuckle that day.
On what day?
On Christmas Eve.
Doing what?
reaching in the toolbox of my truck and then into the pocket on the door. I cut open my knuckle and there's a blood stain on the door, on the driver's side door.
Sources of mine have mentioned that you also, when you came home on the 24th, did some laundry. You washed your clothes. Do you understand why that may look a little suspicious to the average person? Why would he come home and do his laundry?
Well, the average guy that goes out in the ocean fishing gets some salt water on him and comes home wet.
And so
What are you going to do with your wet saltwater clothes?
Yeah. So you
Anyways,
just decided...
but now again, I probably shouldn't even mention that because what they've asked me not to. So we should, we'll have to stop with that line of questioning.
Oh, more of the same there, and this is really concerning. I know you mentioned on Good Morning America that it wouldn't surprise you if they found blood, and his answer is just sure. It's very, very straightforward. It's one word. He's hoping that sure will suffice. Not for the interviewer, who's really now on to his tactics. So she says, in your vehicles, explain why. And he says, well, take a look at my hand and you can see, cuts here on my knuckles, numerous scars. I work on farms. I work with machinery. I know I cut my knuckle that day. Once more, he says, well, take a look at my hand. So proof offered, although proof is in inverted commas, because the fact he has scars there on his knuckles today does not really explain why there was blood in his car from that day. But once more, it's this proof that's offered. It's, look, physically you can see these things in front of you. I must be really honest and upfront and straightforward. Now look at that description, because he's asked, what day does this happen? Christmas Eve. He's doing what? And he says, reaching in the toolbox of my truck and then into the pocket on the door, I cut open my knuckle and there's a blood stain on the door on the driver's side. Okay. Does anyone know how he cut his hand? Was it when he was reaching into the toolbox of his truck, or was it when he put his hand in the pocket on the door? He doesn't say. He just says, I cut open my knuckle. But when and how? Reaching into the toolbox, snagged it on a tool, or cut it on a screwdriver or the saw or whatever it is. But he doesn't say how it happened, really. He tells us some actions he took. He reached into the toolbox and then reached into the pocket, but he doesn't say how this cut on the knuckle happened. He's then asked, sources of mine have mentioned that you also, when you came home on the 24th, you did some laundry, you washed your clothes. Do you understand why that may look a little suspicious to the average person? Why would he come home and do his laundry? Now, do you understand why that might look a little suspicious is a yes or no question. You can answer that with yes, I do, or no, I don't, and then you can qualify either thing. Instead, he says, well, the average guy that goes out in the ocean fishing, gets some salt water on him, comes home wet. What are you going to do with wet salt water clothes? He talks about the average guy, not him. The average guy goes out and gets some salt water on him. Again, not Scott. He comes home wet. What are you going to do? So again, it's not him, with your wet salt water clothes. So he doesn't talk about himself and that day, the 24th. He doesn't say, yeah, I went out on the ocean fishing. I got salt water all over my clothes and they needed washed straight away when they came in. No, he just talks about the average guy, what happens to him, and then asks the question, what are you going to do with your wet saltwater clothes? And you'll notice he finishes with a question. That's a distancing, distracting technique here. He makes us think about what we would do and go, oh yeah, if I had salt water or wet saltwater clothes, I'd take them off. I might well throw them straight in the laundry. So he's trying to distract away here. And maybe we realizes that doesn't work, because then we have the ordering statements again. Anyways, but now again, I probably shouldn't even have mentioned that because of what they've asked me not to. So we should, we'll have to stop with that line of questioning. So we've got the order in there. We've had the brakes on before, and now we'll have to stop. He's determined to shut down any line of questioning that makes him explain his actions on the day of the 24th. And notice we've had some sort of turn down in who it is that's asked him not to mention things. It may well just be Scott doesn't want to mention things and has made up that that he's been asked not to. You remember the first time he said it was law enforcement and private investigators. and then it just became investigators in general. So the first time it was a lot of people on both sides. They both have all said this. And then it just became investigators, which is less. It's turned down a bit. And now he's saying it's they've. Just a very generic they've asked me not to. And he says, we probably shouldn't even mention that. So it's just a probably, i.e., I think this is his decision. This is not something I want to talk about. So I'm going to make up this fact that I've been asked not to talk about things like why I did the laundry that day.
I talked to Mr. Rocha yesterday, Dennis Rocha.
Oh, great, good.
And he didn't have too many positive things to say.
Correct.
One of the things he said, and I'm quoting here, as far as you're concerned, it's lie after lie with Scott. Does the guy ever tell the truth?
That's unfortunate that that's his thought of me.
Do you understand why he feels that way, though? As far as the girlfriend is concerned? And
well, certainly, it was an inappropriate thing. And I never lied to Dennis. I have never lied to Dennis. I think I saw him last Laci's disappearance, and prior to that, it was a year before that Laci and I never saw him. That's her father, Dennis.
Right, right.
Okay, so we have once more this, when bad things happen, when things are brought up that I don't want to talk about, I'm going to pretend I'm glad these things have been mentioned, that I'm in control, bad things don't happen to me. So the interviewer says, I talked to Mr. Rocha yesterday. He says, okay, good. Yeah, great. You've talked to someone who's calling me a liar. Why is that a good thing whatsoever? More of his favourite word, unfortunate. It's lie after lie with Scott. Does the guy ever tell the truth? That's unfortunate that that's his thought of me. It's unfortunate. It's not bad luck. It's not a slight mishap or anything like that. It's based on your behaviour, the affair that you had. It's not unfortunate. It is actually on the basis of your actions, Scott. So you're downplaying this, or you are really minimising what's going on by calling it unfortunate. You'll notice when it's put to him, it's lie after lie with Scott. Does the guy ever tell the truth? There is no denial of lying. No, none whatsoever. It's just, it's unfortunate that that's his thought. Really, at the very beginning of this interview, the very beginning of part one, when he's talking about the search that he wants to say that is going on for Laci and this very, very important thing that he's doing, his answers can last for a minute. Lots of words, lots of talking about all the things, about what is important for people to do, about how they can help. We even saw it when he diverted from talking about the phone call he made to Amber Fry to going into giving the tip line information, 2 numbers, a website address, and so on and so on. Long, long answers when he's giving away the information that he wants to get across here. When the interviewer brings up things he doesn't, his answers are very short. I talked to Mr. Rocha yesterday. Okay, good. 3 words. He didn't have too many positive things to say. Correct. And then it's lie after lie with Scott. That's unfortunate that that's his thought of me. That's 8, 9 words of an answer, and definitely no denial of lying. He wants to move on at this point, but the interviewer presses him. Do you understand why he feels that way, though, as far as the girlfriend is concerned? And he says, well, certainly, it was an inappropriate thing. Again, another one of Scott's favourite words. An inappropriate thing. Not a really bad thing, not a terrible thing to do. No regret, remorse there at all. It was just inappropriate. And then he says, I had never lied to Dennis. I have never lied to Dennis. So he says, I had never lied to Dennis, then restates it, thinks he can say it a better way. I have never lied to Dennis. So let's break that down. The first thing he said was, I had never lied to Dennis. So that's had in the past tense, suggesting that perhaps he has. Now, I had never lied to Dennis, then thinks, that's the truth and it's come out, but that doesn't sound great. I'm going to change it to something that's much more reassuring. I have never lied to Dennis. I'll go with the first version there. At some point, he had never lied to Dennis, and he has at some other point, but he wants to cover that up, so he restates it as saying, I have never lied to Dennis. There's another correction here. When he's talking about how often him and Laci have seen Dennis, and he says, before that, Laci and we never saw him. That's her father, Dennis. So he's that thing he wants to do of joining himself up with other people. So he doesn't like talking about himself. He likes talking about what him and others have done. So I think that's we had never seen her father, Dennis.
Are you in any way connected to Laci's disappearance?
I had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance.
What
And
would you-
again, even if people out there question that, if they would just look at their hearts and make the effort to bring her home to her family, I don't care what you think of me.
Because someone out
But
there knows.
know, yeah, someone out there knows. And you can be the key to finding them by putting out that, you know, Nick's
You're
flyer.
looking at the camera.
Well, it's a plea to the audience.
ahead.
That's why we're doing this.
Go ahead. I mean, if you want to make a statement to anybody who out
Well,
there.
that is, I mean, look in your hearts and know that you've done what you can to bring Laci home. And if you haven't, please do it. And that's going to LaciPeterson.com and printing out that flyer and putting it in every medical building, on your car, in bus stations, or use the tip lines if you have any information. That's what's going to bring her home. And think what you want of me, but you know in your hearts you should be helping Laci.
I know that.
And that's really all I think I have to say.
Okay. I just want to ask
Thanks,
you.
Gloria.
This is the most concerning extract in this entire interview. She asks the big question first. Are you in any way connected to Laci's disappearance? And the first thing he says is, I had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance. Now, in statement analysis terms, that's somewhat of a reliable denial. He does say it really quickly, though, as if this is something that he's thought about saying beforehand. He comes in almost on the top of the word disappearance in the question, so I take some points off for that, if you like. But I had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance. It's got who is talking here, so it's I, so he's owning what is said there. It's got a what, which is had nothing to do. Now that's in the negative, but it's really hard to say you didn't do something without stating it in the negative. And it's what we're talking about, which is Laci's disappearance. I had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance. Has a who is saying it, has a what they are saying, and it has what they are talking about within it. But then he goes on to offer extra. If he left it at that, I would be, wow, that's quite a strong, reliable statement. But then he goes on to say even more. He says, and even if the people out there question that, they would look at their hearts and make the effort to bring her home to her family, I don't care what you think of me. None of that is in any way relevant to the question that was asked. So he's blurting out more information. He's trying to make his point stronger that he had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance. Listen, truthful people in general just tell the truth. They would have said, I had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance, and leave it at that. But the fact that he feels the stress to say more, to say this extra, is really revealing. Also, he does deal with the question in a way, but what makes me think that he has a prepared answer there is he's asked, are you in any way connected to Laci's disappearance? And he doesn't mention the connection there at all. He doesn't say, I have no connection with Laci's disappearance. He says, I had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance. You find that happens quite often when someone has a list of phrases and denials that they want to make sure are out there, that they've thought through, maybe even written down, but certainly thought through before. I had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance. Another couple of common themes here. He talks about people's hearts, and he talks about bring her home to her family, which again, it suggests Laci has no say in this whatsoever, that someone has to bring her home to her family. And then it gets worse. He says, because somewhere out there, yeah, somebody out there knows, and you could be the key to finding them by putting out that, you know, the Knicks flyer. And the interviewer says, you're looking at the camera. And he says, well, it's a plea to the audience. That's why we're doing this. And she says, go ahead if you want to make a statement to anybody. So he's already told us he's making a plea to the audience, the people watching this, you and me. She says, make a statement to anybody. So she gives him carte blanche to make a statement to anybody. And you remember the statement? Well, there's certainly no plea there to Laci, just to the audience. So he doesn't enter into his head that Laci could be watching or hearing this whatsoever. He makes no plea to Laci. By the way, he's going to say later that he thinks she's been abducted. He makes no plea to an abductor either, or, you know, those pleas you hear to, you know, someone must know who's got Laci, you know, you can't keep something like that to yourself. He makes no plea to Laci, no plea to an abductor, no plea to anyone who might know an abductor. He just makes the statement to the audience watching. So that's what's important to him, is what the audience watching hear. And he says, well, that is, I mean, look in your hearts and know that you've done what you can to bring Laci home. And if you haven't, please do it. And that's going to lacipeterson.com and print out the flyer and put it in every medical building, on your car and bus stations, or use the tip lines if you have any information. That's what's going to bring her home. Think what you want of me, but you know in your hearts you should be helping Laci. So he mentions the web URL. First of all, I've seriously wondered if he had Google ads on that website or something like that. And then we have the familiar themes of bringing her home, very important to him, and familiar theme of heart as well. But ultimately, this is manipulative once again. It is, you guys, if Laci dies, it's your fault because you're not looking for her hard enough. Forget any part that I had to play in it. Even as we've spoken here, if he's pretending to be innocent, he has done things and told Laci things that could have caused her to leave home, but he's taking no ownership of that whatsoever. It's everyone else's fault if Laci dies. The interviewer tries to ask another question and he says, that's all I have to say. So the control is back. Okay, I just want to ask you, thanks, Gloria. Control is back. I'm putting the brakes on. But man, Gloria is good because she goes for it again.
One last thing, if that's okay, about Laci, because I know that you get really choked up when you talk about it. Tell me what you love about Laci.
God, I think you can sum it up pretty easily with looking at her photograph. The photograph for a big smile in the press.
Because you guys met in college, or?
Yeah.
And tell me what connected you two right away. I know she's got a beautiful smile, but what linked you guys?
I don't know, just being able to complete each other. I think that's it. But, I mean, you asked how, well, and all you have to do is look at that picture. And you know that she's a bright one, a bright light in a lot of people's lives. So.
You think she's still alive?
She is.
You're sure of that?
Yes. Laci's still alive. She's out there and someone's holding her, and these are critical days that we have left until the due date of February 16th. And we just need all of your help.
You haven't said anything about your baby.
That's entirely too difficult to speak about.
Do you go into the baby's room?
No, that door's closed.
How long will it remain closed?
Until there's a little guy in there. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is the interview. But hey, the worries keep on coming. He's asked one last thing, if that's okay, about Laci, because I know you get really choked up when you talk about it. Tell me what you love about Laci. And this is a question about emotions. And he's avoided questions and struggled with questions about emotions and feelings all the way through this interview. And you can see it takes him aback because he's like, oh, well, I think you can sum it up pretty easily with looking at her photograph. The photograph for a big smile in the press. The photograph for a big smile in the press. So he's asked what you love about Laci, and he's very distant. It's a photograph of a smile which was picked for the papers, for the press. What do you love about your wife? Her photograph. Wow. I mean, that is really struggling to talk about your emotions. And by the way, he doesn't say this about him. This is about you. I think you can sum it up pretty easily with looking at her photograph. So he doesn't even say that he likes the photograph. He's just saying people should like the photograph. Exceedingly worried. He's asked to talk about emotions and feelings, and once more, he can't. And as I said in episode 1, why would you not talk about emotions and feelings? Is it that your real emotions are not something you want to let out, that you want people to hear? Is it that you don't have any? Or is it that you have real trouble accessing them? He struggles again with the next question. Tell me what connected you two right away. I know she's got a beautiful smile, but what linked you guys? So the interviewer is right onto him. What did you love about your wife? Her smile in a photograph. She's not buying any of this. And he says, so he's struggling to find the words to talk about emotions. Being able to complete each other. I think that's it. But I mean, you asked how. Well, all I have to do is look at that picture and, you know, she's a bright one, a bright light in a lot of people's lives. So here we go. Once more, he talks about what Laci means to other people. She's a bright light in a lot of people's lives. He doesn't include himself in that once more. It's just a bright light in a lot of people's lives. We have the smile and we have the bright light, but really nothing about her character. And maybe I'm overthinking this one, but the word complete felt really final to me. Yeah, just a really final word. Complete. Over. Done. And by the way, it was only being able to complete each other. It wasn't that they did complete each other. You know the film Jerry Maguire, which I think might have been big around here, which is why the word complete comes in. The phrase in that was, you complete me. Yeah, so it wasn't that you're able to complete me. It could happen one day. You know, the ability is there. It was, you complete me. I am completed by you. Here, it is just being able to complete each other. So he doesn't even say that it happened. He just really struggles emotionally, doesn't it? I mean, let's give him a point for using present tense. She is a bright one. Yeah, she's a bright one. He does use present tense. He's asked, do you think she's still alive? And he answers, bang, immediately, straight away. He doesn't think or consider his answer here. I mean, what would you be thinking a month on from the disappearance of your wife who's pregnant? Would you have all sorts of worries and concerns? Because if he does, he's not talked about one concern, worry, fear he has around her whatsoever. And he's asked, do you think she's still alive? And he says right away, she is. You're sure of that? Yeah, Laci's still alive. She's out there and someone's holding her. These are crucial days, critical days that we have left until the due date of February 16th, and we just need all your help. So here we go. We've got a couple of things here. We've got she's out there. Once more, this thought that, you know, he said he wanted tips from the neighborhood, but he's convinced she's out there. That's far away. That's very open, isn't it? She's out there. And out there, and not, you know, inside, just out. She's out there and someone's holding her, but he made no plea to that person holding her. He has asked for no information regarding the person holding her whatsoever. All you've got to do is put up Laci's flyers. So he's saying here, someone's holding her, but he has no, this is the first time he's really mentioned this, someone holding her whatsoever. But he made no plea to that person that's holding her. He's asked for no information around that person that's holding her whatsoever. I don't think he believes that someone's holding her. I really don't. And then this worries me. He's asked, you haven't said anything about your baby. He says, that's entirely too difficult to speak about. Do you go to the baby's room? No, that door's closed. How long will it remain closed? And he says, till there's a little guy there. Till there's a little guy there. Not until the little guy, the one that in his head is still alive and growing inside Laci while she's being held. Until the little guy's in there. No, it's until there's a little guy in there. Just any little guy will be in there. Extremely worrying. And that's the interview. Let's start with the signs of innocence that I see. The plus points that I'll give him through the entire interview that we've looked at across two parts. He talks about Laci in the present tense all the time, and he does use Laci's name a lot as well, but he talks about her all the time in the present tense. He never slips and refers to her in the past tense whatsoever. And there is a desire to have her return home. Yeah, so those are the signs of innocence. Let's balance that with how many signs of guilt I see. He doesn't answer questions. He will talk about something else. He will avoid, especially those difficult questions. When it's an easy one, he will answer for ages. But the difficult questions, he really distances himself from that. He will start talking about something and move it on to talk about something else. Many attempts to control the interview. There's things he does not want to talk about. And at those points, he says, let's put the brakes on. Let's stop. I'm not here to talk about this, Gloria. So there is so many attempts to control the interview. When he talks about the facts that have happened, they are all in his favor. He doesn't mention any of the facts like his affair or anything like that are not in his favor. When he says these are the facts, they are all in his favor. That mention of grief, the grief that he said was felt after 3 days, when he talks about trying to communicate with Laci as if he was trying to talk to a dead person, and the fact he made no plea to Laci and no plea at all to the abductor or anything like that. He showed that what this interview was about was the audience's perception of him. Do you want some more signs of guilt? No thought of the baby. Laci was 7.5 months pregnant when she went missing, and he shows no thought for the baby. We're well into the interview until he mentions it at all, but he really, really does not think of that whatsoever. There's low or next to no worry or concern for Laci. In his head, he said to us, she's still alive and someone's holding her, but he expresses very little worry or concern for her safety. And then the allegations that are put to him around blood, around cement bags, and more, the life insurance policy, he's not clear in denying those allegations. So in conclusion, Scott Peterson is a controlling and manipulative person. We saw that time and time again through the interview. He shows no remorse whatsoever for his bad behavior. He does admit to bad behavior. He does admit to having an affair, and he shows no remorse for that whatsoever. In fact, it's our fault if bad things happen because of his bad behavior, not his. So he's a horrible, controlling, manipulative person who has no remorse for bad things he's done. And from use of the word like grief, from use of the words like out there, I think at the point of this interview, he knows where Laci is at the point he gives this interview, and he knows that she and the unborn baby are dead. If you want to take something away from this, remember clarity. How did he cut his hand? What were the cement bags for? It's really not all there. Look for leakage. Yeah, look for words like the grief word that come out, where telling a lie is really hard, and people telling lies, they will leak the truth quite a lot if you know how to look for it. And look for those inconsistencies when he says someone's holding her, but he doesn't make any plea to that person or to Laci directly. Look for those inconsistencies and you will spot lies. If you like this, give it a thumbs up, press the plus button if you can. It makes it get out to more people. Share it with people who may be interested in this. What did I get wrong? What do you think? Answer in the comments or get in touch on social media. All the links are there. And the subscribe button or the follow button means you will get more episodes like this when they arrive. If you're thirsty for more of the book I mentioned, Truthful Deception, you can find out how to get that at neveratruerword.com, where you'll also find a whole load more videos. You will find a whole load more podcasts, and you can sign up for the monthly newsletter too. And we'll see you soon for something new from Never a Truer Word.